So welcome to History Worth Telling. My name's Mark Ellis and I'm a filmmaker based here in Leamington Spa, specialising in local history. The podcast is a series of conversations with people who are passionate about history, so passionate that they've chosen to do something about it. That might be write a book, it might be set up a group, it might be make a film. And I'm fortunate today that my guest is someone who's done all three. I'm very pleased to welcome John Clarke. John, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
So let's start generally with a little bit about you before we get into your particular area of interest. Tell us a bit about your background.
Born and bred in Coventry, literally across the road from Caludon Castle, the ruin. Local education, went to Caludon Castle School, stayed on to the sixth form, and then went into journalism, which I'm still a journalist by profession and now in PR, but many years in journalism before I went into industry. Launched my own PR agency all of 40 years ago. It's our anniversary this year, working for a lot of national, international companies. It's a family business with most members of my family in the business now. I'm still involved in that. And of course, I've got my Caludon Castle project, which has been many decades. And my other passion is Coventry City Football Club, which I was a former chairman and deputy chairman and have been on the board twice. So a lot of interests across the board, from sport through to PR, through to travel and family, of course.
So John, your passion obviously has been Caludon Castle. There are a couple of videos on this channel specifically about Caludon, but for anyone who hasn't seen those, doesn't know anything about Caludon Castle, just explain briefly what it is and its historical significance.
Well, Caludon Castle is today a Grade 1 listed monument. It was built in the early part of the 14th century and has been owned by some of the most powerful families in England. The Seagraves, the Mowbrays, who were Dukes of Norfolk, and the Berkeleys, who still own Berkeley Castle after over 1,000 years of residency there. It was more of a fortified mansion, but it had a moat and 8-foot thick walls, which sadly were demolished in the early 1800s due to the fact that it was it's decaying. But it's had tremendous connections with royalty and William Shakespeare, which is of great interest because two of his plays, Richard II and A Midsummer's Night's Dream, had connections with the Lords of Caludon. Richard II, due to the aborted Battle of Gosford Green in Coventry with Thomas Mowbray, Duke of Norfolk, and Henley Bolingbroke, and A Midsummer's Night's Dream, which was a play written and performed by Shakespeare at the wedding of Thomas Berkeley, Lord Henry's son, which obviously was one of Shakespeare's most famous plays. And rumour has it, although it has to be confirmed by research, but some historians feel that Lord Henry and Catherine were the main characters in A Taming of the Shrew. So lots and lots of connections with Shakespeare, who was only 20 miles away from Caludon Castle. And in terms of the royal connections, Lord Henry was the godson of King Henry VIII, and his children were godchildren of Elizabeth I. So, yeah, a lot of connections with very, very powerful people.
Mm-hmm. And tell me about your passion for Caludon then. You mentioned that you were born at the stone's throw away.
Yeah.
What was it about Caludon and the history of that first kind of engaged the young John?
Well, being born and raised in the shadow of the ruin, obviously my childhood was there. Attending the local school, I was a very keen soccer player, and and was captain of the school soccer team. But at the tender age of 11 or 12, went to the school hall and saw all these coats of arms high up on the school hall walls, and I was intrigued by this, and excuse me, and I asked various teachers who did these coats of arms belong to, and it was the former owners of Caludon. They then gave me, because they could see I was interested in local history, they then gave me a tatty green exercise book where the pedigrees of these families were listed in handwriting. And that basically was the total history of Caludon in one exercise book, together with the Victoria County history, a couple of chapters there. It kicked off from there. I drew the castle, a pen and ink drawing, which is actually on the dust cover of the book, and I started doing very amateur research, and I've handwriting, and I've still got the book where I've got all my handwriting in with the research I did. It just grew and grew, and as people could see, I was really interested in the history of this mysterious romantic ruin with a dry moat, which sometimes filled when it was raining. People just kept asking questions, and I developed it. Took a break for many years because obviously with career and family, and then came back to it in the early 2000s and commissioned historical experts, historians, Stephen Johnson and George Demidovich, to take it forward, and they uncovered some remarkable research.
Tell me a little bit about the process of discovery of that research. What was it that Stephen and George kind of added to the project and discovered with you, and how did that transform, well, I guess everybody's understanding of what Caludon was and its significance?
This was a lost history, and it's a term that's used on the video. Nobody actually delved into the centuries of the past of Caludon, and I commissioned Stephen, who is an expert manorial lordship researcher, who is now the chair of the Manorial Society of Great Britain, and he actually went down to Ugbrook, which is the stately home of Lord Clifford of Chudley. His ancestors were the owners of Caludon, lords of the manor of Caludon, and he discovered in their muniments room a couple of boxes of these historical deeds. So that really opened up a treasure trove for us. He produced the first report, which was very, very useful, which expanded the research that I'd been doing over the years. And then about 2005, 2006, I asked George Demidovich, the former conservation and archaeology manager at Coventry Council, would he look into it? Well, George and I went down to Ugbrook and became great friends with Lord Clifford, and there were another 5 or 6 boxes. And to quote George, he said, "We've actually got a real story here. This is a light bulb moment." He was very excited, as I was, and we were seeing things such as the original license to crenellate the castle in 1305 with a seal of King Edward I, with the actual license in Latin. It was an amazing discovery, and we spent a lot of time, 2 or 3 visits down to Ugbrook. Lord Clifford was extremely helpful, and the research went from there. And between Stephen and George, with my daughter Samantha's help as well, we started to create the book. And the book was published in 2014, got tremendous reviews in the press, and described as a true authoritative historical research, the first ever book dedicated to Caludon. And from that, a number of initiatives took place. I commissioned the scale model of the castle, which again had never been done before, which Peter Garbett, a good friend, did an amazing job. And we sent that round local schools. And then we went from there to do a fully fledged exhibition at the Herbert Museum, attended by over 2,000 people in over 2 months. That got a tremendous response.
Fantastic. And I mean, a couple of the steps on the way to being able to publish the book, I'd like to talk about perhaps in a little bit more detail. How you got from this site, which is basically one fragment of wall, to knowing what the house looked like in its heyday. So the first of those was the resistivity survey,
yeah.
And then obviously you commissioned Pete Urmston to create a visualization of what the buildings actually looked like using that data from the resistivity survey. Tell us a bit more about that.
It goes back a few years, because I was fortunate enough to meet a gentleman called Mick Flitcroft, who had done his PhD on Caludon Castle, the building, and he had commissioned an early resistivity survey, which showed that there were foundations beneath the bailey of the castle, now covered over with grass, obviously, which showed the outline. And then George Damivich and I decided, he was then still with Coventry Council, that we would jointly fund an up-to-date modern resistivity survey, and the results were absolutely fantastic. We could see the complete outline of where the Great Hall was, the great chambers, the porch, the kitchens, etc. It was a complete outline, a footprint of the castle, from which Pete Urmston, who was a commissioned artist with English heritage, could actually take that footprint and almost build up, looking at contemporary buildings of the period, obviously, as well, from around 1590, and actually built the castle using 3D, etc. And it was quite amazing. The end product was really was a fantastic view of what the castle was almost certainly as near as to look like in that period, at the very height when the Berkeleys were in ownership with Lord Henry and Lady Catherine.
And the book and indeed the film, which was a real pleasure to work on, paint an incredibly rich portrait of what Caludon was really like. But obviously the process of producing the book, the process of producing the film, also had an element of kind of myth busting about them.
Yeah.
Tell us a bit about what were the myths that existed previously about Caludon that you were able to dispel?
That's a very good question, because there are a lot of myths, there are a lot of mistakes, particularly on the internet. Probably the biggest is that the Caludon was demolished by Cavaliers or Roundheads in the English Civil War in the 1640s. Totally incorrect. As a result of our research and the documents from Ugbrook and Lord Clifford, there were inventories that go well into the 1700s, early 1700s. Caludon, as I said before, was demolished. It became very expensive and ran into decay. And Lord Clifford's ancestors were actually knocking down quite a few buildings in the area. They owned a lot of land in Warwickshire. And the other one, of course, which is of legend, really, is that Caludon was the birthplace of St George of England and son of Albert. And that really is legend, but it's great for publicity and marketing of Caludon. But at the end of the day, it's not correct. We have to do a chapter in the book on the background of that story and legend, and it was probably something that was promoted at plays during the 16th century, and the Barclays were adding to the story, and it just grew from there. But still to this day, people are taking pictures, and the press take pictures of somebody dressed as St George with a dragon outside Caludon Castle's ruin, which is fantastic.
Mm-hmm. And obviously, I mean, Caludon's been a huge part of your life, and you've invested a huge amount of effort into revealing its history and then communicating that to people. What do you get out of it? What's it given you working on this project?
Well, I've always been interested in local history, but I think that the fact is there's a personal connection, being born and raised as a child over the park, in the shadow of the castle, attending the school with the castle's name. It's brought me into contact with a lot of people. It's opened a lot of doors. It's a legacy, really. Reconnected with old school friends from all over the world, from Canada through to Australia, renewed friendships. And my parents were always saying, when are you going to finish the book? And there's a great love of the castle in the area. I met a lot of people and knew that I had heard from my parents. I was researching the book, and when the book appeared, there was just a great feeling of achievement, really. And it's a legacy, because that book will go down the centuries as the authoritative history of the lost history of Caludon Castle. Mm. So yeah, a lot of payback. It was entirely self-funded, as there was no help with actually the cost of any of the projects to do with Caludon. But my bottom line view, if I don't do it, it's not going to happen. So it had to be done.
So what comes next?
Well, the Caludon project continues. There's something inside me that would actually like to do a small play on the castle site, because when the Barclays were in ownership, with our research, I have all the Barclay accounts through Berkeley Castle from the late 1500s, early 1600s, and the Barclays entertained very, very regularly with players such as the Earl of Pembroke's men, the Lord Chamberlain's men. These were actors from London, from all over the country. There were singers, what they called fools. It was a great entertainment venue. I would like to see perhaps a reenactment of the likes of A Midsummer Night's Dream. But the research continues, it never stops. And the other, apart from a play, hopefully one day in the future, there will be almost certainly a second edition of the book with new research that's been uncovered.
And obviously my particular interest is in the film, being a filmmaker and also specifically having been involved in the production of this. Just interested in your take on why you felt the need, if you like, to have a film as well as a book, and how do the two pieces complement one another? Well,
the book achieved its aims in terms of a very comprehensive account of the history. But the book would have a limited audience, I thought, and it still sells through YouTube, and it trickles. We do get orders most weeks, most months from all over the world, as I say, not just locally in Coventry or nationally. But I felt if we were going to reach a wider audience, a film depicting the main milestones of the history was the right thing to do. I did happen to see a certain film called Birth of a Spartan by a certain film producer called Mark Ellis, and when I saw that film I thought, I must do something similar. And I think that was the right decision. It's opened a lot of doors, and in the modern age, obviously, a film was going to reach a lot wider audience, and it's in 18 months to go to nearly 4,000 views. I'm delighted with.
Brilliant. Well, we'll link to the film, which is on YouTube, so it's freely available to view. We'll link to that in the notes accompanying this video. What about the book? If someone wants to get hold of a copy of the book, how do they do that?
The book can be purchased through eBay or direct. There is through my company Century PR, which is
again
on the website.
We'll add some links to the podcast.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, that's really fascinating, John. I really appreciate you coming and sharing with everybody.
Thank you.
This is one of a series of podcasts we'll be releasing monthly with passionate historians like John. So if you'd like to stay in touch, please do subscribe to the channel. And lastly, just leaves me to say, John, thank you very much for joining us.
A pleasure, Mark. Thank you.